Hello, everybody. Dennis Prager here. There's an article in the Wall Street Journal. I'm going to have the man on. Not on now. We're going to have him on this week or next week. About Portland and about the violence of people, Antifa and other leftists, and the police doing absolutely nothing in Portland. And there's an article now I want to read to you from in today's or on today's National Review site. 2 Minnesota Republican candidates assaulted. I predicted, I wrote a column on this about a month or two ago, that the left will be violent. And it's so obvious that only fools can deny that the violence in this country will come from the left. It almost always does. There are right-wing outliers, of course, who commit violence. But the right wing, the conservatives, do not countenance it, but left wing does. They think it's okay. And again, it's because normal rules do not apply if you're on the left. You know, I say these things, and I know when I say it that there are a lot of people who listen who think that it's exaggeration. I know that. It is something I live with until I'm vindicated later by events. When I said there was a civil war in this country, people, my respect greatly, like Jonah Goldberg said it, that Dennis is overwrought on this issue. You know, we shouldn't use that rhetoric. It's not yes, it is a civil war. I always said it's nonviolent, but it will be violent. The left is violent. The left everywhere in the world is violent. Not liberals. Leftists are violent because normal moral rules do not apply to them. That's another column I wrote recently. They are Übermenschen. Leftists do not believe normal rules apply to them. So I read to you this from National View today. 2 Republican candidates for state office in Minnesota have been physically assaulted in recent days, leading prominent Republican lawmakers to caution their Democratic colleagues against employing inflammatory rhetoric. Good luck. Republican State Representative Sarah Anderson was punched in the arm last week after confronting a man who was destroying yard signs promoting Republican candidates. It was just insane. He was charging at me saying, "Why don't you go kill yourself?" Anderson told the Washington Free Beacon. To have someone physically coming after you and attacking you is just disheartening. Of course, she's afraid to use real reason. The left produces evil people, and this is an example of that. That's what she should have said. But they don't say it because Republicans don't understand that they are the thin line between decency and indecency. That is it. Just like the police are the thin blue line between chaos, anarchy, violence, and peace, so too the Republicans are the imperfect wall between disaster, violence, and the like, and chaos versus order. Republicans do not understand the role they're playing. Very, very, very few do. Ironically, the one of the clearest on this is Donald Trump. And he wasn't even clear on this when he ran. He's now clear on it. Shane McClelland, a first-time Republican candidate for the state legislature, suffered a concussion over the weekend after he was sucker punched while meeting with constituents at a local restaurant. I was overtaken by surprise and shock, and if this is the new norm, this is not what I signed up for, said McClelland, who has suffered, listen to this, he has suffered from memory loss and sensitivity to light since the incident. Local police confirmed that a suspect had been identified in connection with both assaults and said, does that mean that there's one suspect in both assaults or there's one different suspect for each assault? The English is not clear to me. And said charges will likely be filed in the coming days. The attacks took place days after the Democratic Farmer Labor Party, that's the official title of DFL in the Democratic Party in Minnesota, suspended a communication staffer for 1 week. For 1 week. For 1 week. It's a disgusting party, the Democratic Party. For writing in a Facebook post that Democrats would, quote, bring Republicans to the guillotine. A 1 week suspension. And they yell at the president for being divisive, these phonies. Majority Leader Mitch McConnell and fellow prominent Republicans have cautioned their Democratic colleagues in recent weeks against using inflammatory and divisive rhetoric and have increasingly cast them as the unhinged party of mob rule when addressing voters. They are the unhinged party of mob rule. That's exactly right. Only one side was happy to play host to this toxic fringe behavior, McConnell said Thursday. McConnell's turned out to be quite a man. Referencing the raucous protesters that descended on the Capitol during Justice Brett Kavanaugh's confirmation hearing. Only one side's leaders are now openly calling for more of it. They haven't seen enough. They want more, and I'm afraid this is only phase one of the meltdown. That is correct, Mitch McConnell. It's only phase one. The more they don't control the courts, the more they don't control the presidency and the House and the Senate, the more violent they will get. They have to win. They are for power. The essence of leftism is power. The essence of conservatism is less power. See? It's pretty simple, isn't it? It really is simple. Conservatives want less power by definition. By definition. Conservatives want less power. Make government smaller. Give us less power. The left, make government bigger. Give us more power.
The bigger the government, the smaller the citizen.
Only one side's leaders are now openly calling for more of it, McConnell said. Asked about Senator Cory Booker, Democrat, New Jersey, urging his constituents to, quote, get up in the face of, quote, politicians they disagree with, Senator Rand Paul said the statement could be misinterpreted by the mentally ill. Senator Paul doesn't understand the evil of the left either. Cory Booker's a lowlife, okay? New Jersey seems to just love lowlifes. The guy is a nothing. The guy's a colossal zero. He's a demagogue. He stands for nothing but power. It's so obvious to anybody who isn't on the left that it's almost like wearing a sign. I stand for nothing except Cory Booker. That's it. Life's treated him terrifically, and he's an ingrate. Urges constituents to get up in the face of politicians they disagree with. And that's all that Rand Paul could say? It could be misinterpreted by the mentally ill? No. Senator Paul, it could be rightly interpreted by the non-mentally ill. It could be rightly interpreted by every leftist in the country to sucker punch a Democrat. Or at least scream obscenities in their face. Every day I bring to you evidence, not opinion, evidence on how low-life the left is. And yet, you all know people who vote left, who think that the big problem is Donald Trump, the big problem are Republicans. Because the evidence is irrelevant to these people. Irrelevant. This is more Rand Paul. I think what people need to realize that when people like Cory Booker say, get up in their face, he may think that's okay. Let's see. Who's he? I'm not following. When people like Cory Booker say get up in their face, he may think that's okay. I guess he's thinking of Booker. Said Paul, who was present when Representative Steve Scalise, Republican in Louisiana, was shot at a practice for the annual congressional baseball game last year. But what he doesn't realize, I guess this is Booker, this is Rand Paul speaking about Cory Booker, but what he doesn't realize is that for about every 1,000th person that might want to get up in your face, one of them is going to be unstable enough to commit violence. Well, bravo to you, Rand Paul. That is correct. When you believe that the other side is sexist, intolerant, xenophobic, homophobic, Islamophobic, racist, and bigoted, why can't you sucker punch them? If you believe the other side is composed of white supremacists and Nazis, why not beat them up and shoot them? Let's be honest, folks. What does a Nazi really deserve, after all, right? That's why left-wing rhetoric must lead to violence. That plus the belief that leftists do not have to live by the same rules as the rest of us. That is basic to leftism. See the Amy Wax situation at the University of Pennsylvania. 1-8-Prager-776. I'm Dennis Prager. All right, everybody, Dennis Prager here. You got to fight, everybody. I beg you, or at least help the people who are fighting. That's my way of putting it to you. All right, 1-8-Prager-776. Those stories were quite frightening that I just brought to your attention out of Minnesota. Listen to this. This is astonishing. Every so often there's a piece in the New York Times that amazes me that they would actually print it. It's an opinion piece by a professor of politics, Samuel Abrams, and he is a professor of politics at Sarah Lawrence. Oh, my God. And a visiting fellow at AEI, American Enterprise Institute. A conservative teaching politics at Sarah Lawrence? Whew. This guy has a masochistic streak. Think professors are liberal? Try school administrators. This is what he writes. I received this in the New York Times. I received a disconcerting email this year from a senior staff member in the Office of Diversity. First of all, isn't that amazing? Every college now has an Office of Diversity. It's the left-wing takeover of the universities is total. Office of Diversity and Campus Engagement. At Sarah Lawrence College, where I teach. The email was soliciting ideas from the Sarah Lawrence community. I love even he's bought into this community. For a conference open to all of us titled Our Liberation Summit. What does that mean? The conference would touch on such progressive topics as liberation spaces on campus, Black Lives Matter, and justice for women, as well as for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, intersex, asexual, and allied people. So I guess, what is that? LGBTQIAA. As a conservative-leaning professor... All right, this is our college team. Three Stooges. All right, that's correct. Let me go on here. As a conservative-leaning professor who has long promoted a diversity of viewpoints among my very liberal faculty colleagues and in my classes, I was taken aback by the college's sponsorship of such a politically lopsided event. The email also piqued my interest in what sorts of other non-academic events were being organized by the school's administrative staff members. I soon learned that the Office of Student Affairs, which oversees a wide array of issues, including student diversity and residence life, was organizing many overtly progressive events. Programs with names like Stay Healthy, Stay Woke, Microaggressions, and Understanding White Privilege, without offering any programming that offered a meaningful ideological alternative. This is the brainwash, folks, because they know, the left knows that they can't allow other viewpoints, because they lose. They know deep down, if students are given a 10-to-1 ratio of left to right wing thought, the students will not go left. That's the point. 10-to-1. We just want 1 out of 10 minutes that you get. 1 out of every 10 minutes. These events were conducted outside the classroom in the students' social and recreational spaces. The problem is not limited to my college. While considerable focus has been placed in recent decades on the impact of the ideological bent of college professors, when it comes to collegiate life, living in dorms, participating in extracurricular organizations, the ever-growing ranks of administrators have the biggest influence on students and campus life across the country. What have I told you? Since I begun broadcasting, I discovered this at graduate school at Columbia, that the weakest people in America were college administrators. This was when I was at graduate school. This is a long-time problem. Today, many colleges and universities have moved to a model in which teaching and learning is seen as 24/7. Engagement with students is occurring as much, if not more, in residence halls and student centers as it is in classrooms. Schools have increased their hiring, in areas such as residential life and student centers, offices of student life and success, and offices of inclusion and engagement. It's not surprising that many of the free speech controversies in the past few years at places like Yale, Stanford, and the University of Delaware have concerned events that occurred not in classrooms, but in student communal spaces and residence hall. This is the article will be put up at DennisPrager.com. I'll read you his last paragraph again. This is a professor of politics at Sarah Lawrence. This warped ideological distribution among college administrators should give our students and their families pause. Yes, in fact, my dear families, you might want to pause with regard to even sending your kid to college, unless they absolutely have to learn. You can't learn physics or math or medicine on your own. I fully acknowledge that. But unless they have to, you might really, really consider very strongly what college they go to, or no college at all. I can say with a totally sincere and straight face that if your kid did not go to college but watched every single Prager University video a few times, followed the reading lists, the recommended reading that follows many of those courses, they would be much wiser, much better capable of understanding the world and of dealing with it than if they go to a 4-year college. And guess what? It's free. Use that money to hire tutors or take a trip with your kid around the world. I'm Dennis Prager, 1-8-PRAGER-776.
Live from the Relief Factor Pain-Free Studio.
For more on this, let's go to our headliner, Newt Gingrich, former Speaker of the House and Fox News contributor. Speaker, thank you for coming on this morning. What do you make of the president's handling of this situation with Saudi Arabia?
Well, I think he's in a difficult situation because the Iranians, for example, would love for us to separate ourselves from Saudi Arabia. But the Israelis and others all realize that this is a very, very important ally of ours. I think step one is exactly what Secretary Pompeo is doing. We've got to get to the bottom of this. And frankly, if it does turn out to be somebody very close to the Crown Prince, I think the Crown Prince is going to be in very substantial trouble. That doesn't mean that we're going to break relations with Saudi Arabia, but it does mean we're going to find ways to take steps to communicate very intensely that we just don't accept this. We don't accept it when the Russians poison people in Britain, and we would not accept it if the Saudis have killed a journalist in Turkey. So I do think step one is to get the facts. I think they're working at it, and I think that Secretary Pompeo got a pretty strong pledge. We'll see if the Saudis follow through.
And we'll see what Pompeo says when he comes back. Let's talk about midterms right now, 20 days away. I mean, what is your sense right now when there's a piece out there about Republicans getting their getting pretty taken on the money side? There's some other stories that counter and say that the RNC is doing just fine. I mean, where do you see at the moment us going on November 7th, let's say?
Well, Bill, let me just warn that all of the so-called experts on television who were wrong in 2016 are back this year as confident as they were when they were totally wrong in 2016. Nancy Pelosi yesterday gave the Republicans the greatest gift she could have given them. Her quotes at Harvard, in which she explained you don't really need borders, that after all you ought to be friends with everyone, and that wanting to have a wall is just a macho thing. That is as clear a statement of the insanity of the open borders Democratic Party as we could possibly get. And when combined with Senator Feinstein, both of them, of course, from San Francisco, having introduced a bill in the Senate for open borders, supported, by the way, co-sponsored by every single Democrat in the Senate, I think if that's our choice, I think that we have a.
I think you're hearing something else.
I think we have a very real chance here.
Yeah, I think you're hearing something else in your ear.
I wondered for a half second what that was all about. But let me just say, if the Republicans double down and focus on Kevin McCarthy's bill to bring up in December that would allow us to control the border, and compare that with the Pelosi-Feinstein position of totally open borders at a time when you have a caravan of thousands of people coming out of Central America. And then the American citizens can decide. You want sanctuary cities, you want MS-13, you want fentanyl and opioids, you want literally an unending flood of immigrants from all over the planet, vote Democrat. And on the other hand, if you think America has the right to control its border, vote Republican.
It sounds like that is the issue the president is pushing at this moment, considering the last two tweets from him have been on that, talking about those caravans, saying Democrats won't approve legislation that allows laws for the protection of our country. Great midterm issue for Republicans, he says. And moments ago, he says Republicans must make the horrendous, weak and outdated immigration laws and the border a part of the midterms. This looks like the latest push.
I think that's exactly right. When you say to the average American, we have a Democratic candidate for governor, Stacey Abrams in Georgia, who basically would make all of Georgia a sanctuary state. You have the candidate for governor in California, Gavin Newsom, Democrat, who has said he wants to have universal health care paid by the government, and he wants it to apply to illegal immigrants. Well, that would make California the magnet for the planet. If you have a sickness, move to California and they'll take care of you. I mean, this is a core choice. Is America a country that has the right to protect itself and to define who comes in? Or is America now going to be just an open system where everybody on the planet can come here? That's how big the choice is going to be by Election Day. And I think the Democrats will lose that debate by a huge margin.
Well, let's go to Trish Regan's interview with the president last night, debut of her new show, 8 o'clock Eastern time, prime time on Fox Business. Here's the soundbite from the president. Then I want to get to an AP quote as well. Watch.
I think we're going to do really well. And I don't want to make predictions, but we have great poll numbers. We have tremendous turnout at these rallies, thousands and thousands of people, more than we can hold. There's enthusiasm like we had at, in the last election, 2016, which was quite a spectacular day and evening. I think we have a lot of enthusiasm. I keep hearing about the enthusiasm, the blue wave, but I think we have tremendous enthusiasm.
He's packing them in two at these rallies, going to be in Montana again this week, Nevada and Arizona. If Democrats win the House, if Nancy Pelosi is Speaker, how much have you stopped to consider how this president would work with Democratic leadership in the House? What would that look like?
How do you work with a person who says she wants to impeach you, who despises everything you stand for, and who represents a San Francisco hard left worldview in a party which is becoming the Socialist Party of America?
Is that gridlock?
I think it would be a very contentious. Well, I think on the House side, I think the Senate side, the Republicans are going to gain Senate seats. And I want to be clear. I think that Kevin McCarthy's bill is a really important step in the right direction to control our borders. I think that the odds are increasingly good. The Republicans will keep their majority in the House. And I went through this in 2016. I was on a show 2 weeks to the day before, and somebody said to me, well, if you lose the Senate and you lose the presidency, did you pick the wrong guy? And I said, we're 2 weeks out, and you're assuming? So I would say right now that on the issues, Republicans have a chance to have a historic election night, keep the House, increase the Senate, and have the left be totally shocked.
Well, the president's already preparing for if the Republicans do lose the House. He says it won't be on me. Here he is in an AP interview. Oh, I'm sorry. It's a quote. Here's what he says on that. It's a tough year. The midterms are tough for everybody opposite of president. For whatever reason, nobody has been able to say. And the AP then asked the question, if Republicans were to lose control of the House or a couple of days later, depending on how long it takes to count the votes, do you believe you bear some responsibility for that? The president says, no, I think I'm helping people. What do you make of that?
Well, first of all, the president came out and pointed out that the AP headline was totally wrong and misleading. I think what he said is exactly right. I don't remember any president who has campaigned harder, and I think he's adding more rallies by the day. I think he'll have gotten maybe to 50 rallies by the time of the election. So he's doing his job. He's also raised a tremendous amount of money, so he's doing his job. And now the candidates have to go out and do their jobs. And I think it's fair for him to say, this is not purely a referendum on Trump, but also I would say the premise is wrong. I would not concede losing the House for 1 minute. I think that we have the issues on our side: jobs versus mobs, results versus the resistance, conservative judges versus radicals, and controlling the border versus open borders. I think this is going to be a very surprising election night.
Yeah. He went on the tweet about that, and
by the way, at that point, if we keep the House, does the New York Times have to say that Trump won?
Guess so. Stand by for that. Here is this tweet. AP headline was very different from my quote and meaning in the story. They just can't help themselves. Fake news. You mentioned a Trump referendum. How much do you think it really is all about him?
I think less than people would have expected 2 months ago. I think that the issues are increasingly important. The country understands, in the Kavanaugh fight and the way in which Justice Kavanaugh was lied about, smeared, had character assassination, the childish behavior of the Democratic senators, the imagery of left-wing radicals literally scratching at the door of the Supreme Court. I think all of that has galvanized the country. Excuse me, and actually made the issue much bigger than just Donald Trump. And I mean, as big as Donald Trump is, I think the issue really is, which kind of America do you want? And I was just in Seattle and Dallas and Des Moines, and I can tell you, people were worried about the country. They just weren't worried about the president, and they were more fired up than I ever remember seeing them.
Interesting. Sir, thank you for your time. Come on back real soon, okay? We got 20 days here, okay?
Alrighty.
Final sprint. Newt Gingrich, thank you.
Ann Coulter, of course, best-selling author, a great columnist. Now her new book, Resistance is Futile. Great book. Maybe her best ever. Resistance is Futile. Already a big, huge bestseller. And you should get it. Amazon or go to AnnCoulter.com. Ann Coulter, how you doing?
Great. How are you, Mark Simone?
Very good. I'm just reading an email from a listener. He said he went to get your book, Resistance is Futile. He went to Barnes & Noble. He said he had to go in the back, and it was in the history section.
Well, that's not bad. At least they had it.
Yes, but sometimes
better than usual, and this is why Amazon is taking over the world.
Yes,
they don't hide books.
This Barnes and Noble, he said they put the Ruth Bader Ginsburg right in the front, like somebody's going to want this.
No, this has been a long-term problem for conservatives, and the same thing with syndicated columns, which is why whenever a bookstore goes out of business, I cheer. When a newspaper goes out of business, I cheer. They didn't have to be like this, and, the fake news media might want to figure it out. A lot of things used to seem to be indispensable, like buggy whips and MySpace. You're not always indispensable, and all of this censorship isn't that popular. Something will come along to displace you, though it is admittedly difficult in the case of social media giants like Facebook and Twitter, especially Gab. Gab was the alternative to Twitter that wasn't going to censor people. So they get their bank refuses to do business with them. Google won't carry them. The server pulls out on them. It's one thing to say, well, if you don't like how Twitter or Google do business, just start your own. Well, okay, but do we have to lay our own internet lines? Do we have to build our own bank first?
Yeah, it's a bad situation, this censorship. Hey, there's another thing. Harvard is in the middle of this scandal. They may have discriminated against Asians. They would do too much affirmative action. And they keep saying it's all about diversity. Nothing more important than diversity. We have to have diversity for our students. Yet 100% of the professors are far left-wing Democrats. How's that diversity?
No, exactly right. They never mean diversity of thought. They will have all creeds and colors. As long as you're all left-wing, we'll all think exactly the same, but we'll be different colors saying the exact same thing. No, they absolutely do not want diversity of thought. It's gotten so much worse under Trump. They seem morally justified to really aggressively censor conservatives from everything, from television, from their newspapers, from their schools, from everything. And, of course, engage in actual physical violence against conservatives. I loved that last Friday night the conservatives were fighting back with Gavin McGinnis was speaking at the Metropolitan Republican Club, a fine club on the Upper East Side. I usually do my first book signing there because it's in New York, and I love them. And first, the club was vandalized the night before Gavin McGinnis was speaking. Then a huge mob showed up, wearing masks and dressed in black as usual, not from the neighborhood, not Republicans, to inflict violence on people going to hear Gavin McGinnis. But he had his Proud Boys out, and they fought back, and now the social justice warriors are whining and saying, oh, they heard us. Yeah, I'll take Gavin's Proud Boys any day over the Antifa.
Now, you're not allowed to wear a mask while protesting. It's against the law, but police departments have got to start enforcing this law. They got to start arresting people for this.
Yes, that's prima facie scary and dangerous, and you are up to no good and don't want to be identified. There's a good reason for that. It began during, another group of Democrats when the Klan was beating up on first Republicans and then just generally all blacks in the South. Total overlap in Klan and Democrat membership. Not every Democrat was a Klan member, but every Klan member was a Democrat. The Klan was a little like Planned Parenthood that way.
Yeah.
So, as usual, history moves on, and suddenly they start saying, no, that was a Republican organization. Someday they will be claiming that the pro-lifers were Democrats.
We're talking with Ann Coulter. You should get her book, Resistance is Futile. Every time you write a book, it's a great idea, but then it turns out like in the coming months after that, that is like the biggest thing. So the same thing happened here. The resistance, a lot of people have said, as bad as it was, in the last few months, it just ratcheted it up worse than ever. Why is that?
Yes, it really has. Well, if they read my book, they'd know how to attack Trump properly, which would be Democrats should run on building a wall and restricting immigration in order to help the middle class. But I'm starting in the Clinton era, I would say. The Democrats used to appeal to blue-collar workers, used to care about the working class, used to be against unrestricted immigration, driving down wages and changing the culture, and, of course, being illegal in the case of illegal immigrants, which is not all the problem. Wages get driven down by legal and legal immigrants. In any event, around Clinton's time, the Democratic Party just moved to becoming a party of yuppies and immigrants, identity politics. The feminists and the angry grievance groups. But they completely gave up on regular Americans living between the coasts. So they can't do it. All they can do is to unite their base, is to keep screaming about white supremacy, racism, white supremacy. No, keep your eye on the ball. We hate white Americans. It's the only thing that unites these various disparate groups. I don't know if you saw Louis Farrakhan has apparently recently unleashed another gem. He said something like, I'm not an anti-Semite, I'm anti-termite. And as you can see from the hothouse flowers who want to literally make a federal case out of being groped in high school. Don't think it ever happened. This is Christine Blasey Ford, but even if it had, come on, we're talking about being groped in high school. This is not a rape. It's groping, and it's high school, and it's 30 years ago. So how is that group going to fit in with all the Muslims they're bringing in, who don't want women to drive, and women are subordinate, and here you're going to wear this sackcloth over your head? No, their groups really ought to be at one another's throats. I mean, whose jobs are being taken by masses and masses of low-wage immigrants? Well, obviously, any low-wage worker, but that's heavily Hispanics and blacks. That's why we have to keep hearing about racism, fascists. No, don't notice that you hate every other member of the coalition. Just keep your eye focused on you hate white people.
You know, if the Democrats had a real leader, one real smart leader, they would look at all the metrics over the last 2 years and say, everything we are doing isn't working. It's not hurting them enough. We got to switch tactics. Or they'd get your book. Resistance is futile. You explain right in there why this doesn't work and what you should do. But there's no leadership in the Democratic Party.
Yes, well, they have been counting on, especially again, starting with the Clinton administration, that was kind of the transition period, on the new waves of immigrants, being able to demagogue them. Many of them don't speak English. You can rally them with their angry grievance groups, and guess who gets to be, the head of the grievance group? The people, or the ethnic group, the people running the grievance groups. Obviously, anyone coming to this country comes from a less free country, many of them coming from authoritarian countries, so they're used to being pushed around, bossed, and told what to do. So they really are just counting on the wave of immigration to numerically outnumber American voters. That's clearly what Hillary was doing, and, we're about at the tipping point. It's not that far away. She did get more of the popular vote.
Yeah. Well, listen, if you want to read a great book, get Ann Coulter's book. It's called Resistance is Futile. If you find yourself every day saying, what the hell are they, why are they going so crazy over Trump? Read this book. If you're one of these resistance idiots and you say, how come it's not working? Read the book.
Good tips there.
If you know one of these resistance idiots, you have a friend or somebody, get them the book and say, here, read this. I think this might explain why what you're doing isn't going to work. Resistance is Futile. You can get it at Amazon or Barnes & Noble. I would suggest Amazon. It's easier.
It's very easy.
Click 2 buttons. It comes right to your house. But it's a great book. And Ann Coulter's column, it comes out tomorrow, right? New column?
Yes, and for the truly loyal fans, later tonight. It's a good one. It's an excellent example of it's a fake news autopsy.
Oh, good. So just go to AnnCoulter.com. You can get the new column before anybody else, and follow Ann Coulter on Twitter and Instagram and all that stuff. And Ann Coulter, thanks for being with us.
Good to talk to you, Mark Simone. Bye-bye.
Take care.